Charlotte, it's probably cold where you are. Maybe it's cold in Charlotte too. I didn't check the temperature in Charlotte this morning. But if you are on the East Coast and you're joining us live this morning, make sure you stay warm. It is very, very cold. It is a Wednesday. We are back on Soccer Morning. First things first, before we get to all of the soccer, and today's episode features appearances by Luke Moore of the Football Ramble. Always good to talk English football with Luke Moore, and our friend Brian Dunseth from everything Brian Dunseth is from, the original winger on Twitter. You know that guy, Bumpy Pitch and the like. We'll talk to him about MLS SuperDraft. He was there. He's doing that thing. So we'll get into all of that a little bit later on. But first things first, we're finishing up our Indiegogo campaign. We reached the goal. We talked about that yesterday. We established that we've reached the goal. Thank you very much again. It's got a couple hours left on it. No reason to ultimately push it, but just letting you know, it's got a couple hours left. You want to go check it out, soccermorning.com. We'll redirect you. We've gone past our goal. Everything from our end has been spectacular, and we want to thank everybody who supported the show. It means a lot this morning. I mean, it means a lot, period. Sorry. It means a lot this morning, too. But it also means a lot tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. All right, so soccer. This is Soccer Morning. We are going to talk soccer today. We've got transfer window rumors. We've got MLS and the precedent set and what that means. I'm going to get into that in just a second because our friend Eric Gomez tweeted last night and set a particular corner of the MLS Twitter sphere abuzz with the potential that Cruz Azul may dip their toes into the Camilo waters. And what exactly do I mean by that? What I mean is that the precedent set by Camilo, that his contract option, which is unilateral for the club per MLS guidelines, per the MLS boilerplate contract, may be challenged again. Cruz Azul may step up and do that. Now, in the case of Camilo, and we don't have the full reporting, and maybe we can get Eric on in the near future or somebody else, our friend Tom Marshall, who also covers Mexican soccer, and find out exactly what Querétaro paid for Camilo, because I still don't know that. We've heard multiple millions of dollars. What does that mean? I know that means $2 million at least, but I'd be interested to know what the actual fee was, because I think what we're seeing, if Eric's reporting, and we have no reason to doubt him, he's been right pretty much all the time, is that Cruz Azul is going to do the same thing that Querétaro did and go after, and his specific information was a South American player of note. If that's what's going to happen now, if Mexican clubs, and Cruz Azul is a bigger, higher profile and richer club than Querétaro, if they decide they're going to go after American-based players, MLS-based players, who still have a contract option in place, but whose option is not necessarily recognized, it would not be recognized anywhere else or many other places, then MLS has a problem. Again, I think we recognized this when the Camilo situation came to a head. That for whatever reason Camilo decided to do what he did, the larger story for MLS was what it meant after his situation was settled. Because he's just a canary in the coal mine. Once Camilo's situation was settled, and I will say this, from an MLS and Vancouver Whitecaps perspective, and again, multi-million-dollar fee. Okay, generally speaking, that's good. Still would love to know specifically what it was. That saves some face for MLS and for the Vancouver Whitecaps. They didn't just give away their player. They didn't lose their player on a technicality. He didn't break his contract and was backed up by some governing body or the Court of Arbitration for Sport. It didn't go to that level with Camilo. And really, we don't expect MLS to have the stomach to do that right now. Not with everything else going on. Not with all of the growth they've seen. Why would they want to go to court? Especially, again, Querétaro backed down. In my mind, Querétaro backed down because they could have tried to challenge this. Would they have won? I don't know. I wouldn't doubt the strength of MLS and their case, and certainly I wouldn't doubt the lawyers that MLS retains. But they could have done that. Is Cruz Azul looking to do something a step beyond what Querétaro did? Or are they simply going to use the threat of challenging the unilateral option to force MLS to sell a player, perhaps at a cut rate? Because, again, how much is Camilo worth? How much did they get for him? Was it full value? If this next player, provided this comes to pass, is sold and not for full value, that's really bad. That's really bad. And MLS has to deal with Mexican clubs picking off their best talent. And more than almost anything else that's internal pressure from the players or the union or whatever, it may be that kind of thing that forces MLS to say, we've got to give our clubs a little bit more leeway. We've got to figure out a way to pay these players in a way that's going to prevent them from wanting to jump ship to a more lucrative deal in Mexico. Because if MLS teams, if MLS is going to compete with Mexican clubs, and that's not only for eyeballs, because clearly there's a Liga MX market here that MLS has yet to capture. We know that TV is going to be the most important thing facing MLS for the foreseeable future. Even if they get this next deal done, and even if the reports are true that it is a significant amount of money, they need to drive ratings to justify that money and to potentially get more. So if they're working on that, getting some of those eyeballs, those people who watch the Cruz Azuls of the world but don't watch FC Dallas, they need to figure out a way to get those people. And if you're losing your best talent, Camilo included, and whoever this South American target might be, to Liga MX, that's perception-wise, that's terrible. Our friendly foe on Twitter, would leaving on a Camilo only be an issue in this window? New CBA in place before the next time contracts expire. Yeah, I mean, it's something that I'm not sure MLS thought they would have to deal with. Let's say that. Did MLS realize they were going to have to deal with these contract options until Camilo did what he did? And by the way, let's verb the hell out of Camilo. Or a noun. We noun Camilo. I guess he is a noun. But yeah, leaving on a Camilo. A Bosman, a Camilo, we'll just make that happen. It's just a fascinating chain of events that's starting to unfold here. And if this wouldn't have come up if Eric Gomez's reporting did not indicate that Camilo's situation was directly tied to what Cruz Azul may try to do. They have a target in mind. They saw what happened with Querétaro and Vancouver and the fallout from Camilo deciding he was going to pull a Camilo. And now they're emboldened to try it themselves. How does MLS stop it? Should they bother? As Foe points out, new CBA coming up. After this season, there'll be negotiations for a new CBA. Can there be language put into that collective bargaining agreement that will prevent this from happening? It's fascinating. All right. Again, soccerboarding.com for the Indiegogo campaign last couple of hours. Thank you very much to everybody who's helped out. Yes, no one bought the $1,000 dinner with me. I am crushed. No, not really. Not really. It's fine. It's cool. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, Luke Moore from the world-famous Football Ramble will join us. We'll move to English topics. We'll talk, United, Chelsea, Arsenal, Anelka, the whole nine. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV.
Let's begin.
Back on Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV, Kick TV. No, not Kick TV. Not at the moment, anyway. Force of habit. Things change in the new year. It's 2014. In 2014, we've got our friend Luke Moore from the world-famous Football Ramble on the line. Luke, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm good. This is, like I said, it's January. It's traditionally the time when the rumors get hot and heavy, whether there's anything to them, whether there's any substance is always a bit of a debate. There's been a lot of talk about Juan Mata and his situation at Chelsea and the potential of Juan Mata going to Manchester United. And I'm trying to determine what's real and what's not. People on Twitter are telling me that there's already an agreement in place. I don't know if that, like just right now, I don't know if that's happened or not. But from a conceptual standpoint, Juan Mata to United, how do you parse that?
Yeah, I mean, the reports that have come out very recently from a Spanish-based journalist have said that Juan Mata has agreed a deal to go to Manchester United for around £38 million. I don't know if that's been confirmed or substantiated or what, but it certainly seems to come from at least a reasonably reputable source. We'll have to wait and see what happens with that. As for is it the right signing for United? I mean, obviously, if that sort of player comes up, it's almost similar to the Özil to Arsenal deal.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a player they desperately need in that position? Arguably not. But can you pass up the opportunity to sign a player of that quality and that experience? You probably can't. So you can understand why United want to bring him to the club. From Mata's point of view, it's a really difficult one. Obviously, he wants to play because it's a World Cup year. But, I mean, he has actually played quite a few more games than people seem to think. I mean, I think he's featured in around half of Chelsea's Premier League games. So it's not as though he's been frozen out and he's not, he's training with the reserves or something. He is part of the squad. They've got a competitive squad. Now, Jason, I remember talking to you about Juan Mata and Chelsea before on your show and saying that, Chelsea are getting results. So what Mourinho's doing it seems to work. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, Mata's been a casualty of that. So my overall point, I suppose, would be it's a great move for United. But is it a great move for Mata given the situation United are in? It's not difficult to imagine United missing out on the Champions League this season. So does Juan Mata want to not be playing in the Champions League next year? Are there any other clubs that want to come in for him? Has he got an option to go somewhere else? Is he, for some reason, in love with Manchester United? I mean, of course, they are still Manchester United, and it's still a bit of a draw. But it certainly would be a surprising move for him, in my view.
It's interesting to hear you say that. I mean, again, it's Manchester United, but because of the situation they find themselves in this particular season, some of the bloom is off the rose a little bit for a player like Mata, who steps into the starting 11 for nearly every other team in the Premier League outside of Chelsea, perhaps, or Manchester City. So from a Juan Mata perspective, there's some question. From a United perspective, not a no-brainer because, like you said, does this really address their deficiencies? I'm not so sure. From a Chelsea perspective, I mean, I guess if the player wants to go and someone's willing to pay you £38 million or whatever that fee was, I suppose you take it. But in any other season, can you imagine, any other January window, can you imagine Chelsea selling a player like Mata to Manchester United?
Well, I think if Chelsea do sell him, then you've got to give them credit for sort of standing by their manager and standing by their principles, which is we're not going to play you. You're not part of our first 11, when everyone's fit under Mourinho. So, you can go if you want to go. I think it certainly shows that Chelsea and Mourinho don't really see Manchester United as a threat this season,
right?
Because there's no way they would sell him to City or to Arsenal. So, I mean, and maybe the cynic thinks, well, have Man United got some games against rivals that Chelsea have this season? Probably. So could he hurt some of Chelsea's rivals? I mean, that sort of thing comes into it as well. But I think, people talk about that sort of giving everyone a lift at Arsenal, and maybe he wasn't a player they quite needed, but he certainly, helped the club in general. But then you've got to remember that Arsenal signed Matthew Flamini that summer as well, right. and he's performed very well. And he was much more what they needed, and he came in and had an instant impact, and that really made a big deal of Arsenal's improving fortunes as well. So it's not as simple as that. But again, I can only sort of repeat what I've said, which is it's a great move for United because he's a fantastic player. And is it a great move for Mata? I'm not so sure.
It's some of the flip side of this discussion with surrounding Mata and whether or not the deal is in play. As you said, provisionally agreed to a fee to a move doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. But the flip side of this was that Wayne Rooney might be out if Juan Mata comes in. Does that make a lot of sense? And we've heard about Rooney leaving Manchester United for so many years now, and it still hasn't happened. When does that moment come? I don't think it comes in this January window.
It won't come now, but it certainly will happen at some point. I mean, it's been persisting for far too long, really, now to be mere rumour. We know about his problems in the past. That was when Ferguson was still at the club. It seems to me to be very likely that he will move at some point. You could read into it that United sort of signing Mata is maybe preparing the ground for that, and Rooney, one of Rooney's sort of reported potential destinations is Chelsea. So I mean, we may be able to read into that a little bit more, but I don't really have any insight in terms of contacts at the club to be able to substantiate that. But I mean, it certainly seems to me that Rooney will be leaving at some point. So maybe that's got something to do with it. Maybe they think, not only do we need to bring Mata in to potentially replace him, but is it that Rooney's preferred destination is Chelsea, and for us to get a better deal out of it, maybe we can use that to our advantage to try and prize Mata away, and that may well be what they've done.
One of the other names connected with United in recent days is Dante, the defender from Bayern Munich. Questions over whether or not that makes a lot of sense. I mean, again, this is an issue, potentially an issue of the cachet of Manchester United not necessarily matching up to the season that they have. But if there's any legitimacy to Dante moving, does he address part of what's ailing Manchester United?
Yeah, I think so. I think lots been made of their central midfield positions and a shortage of high-class operators there, but I think centre-back, you could argue that as well. I mean, Vidic is probably on a downward turn, I would argue. Ferdinand certainly is. Yes. Phil Jones hasn't nailed down that centre-back position. They've got Johnny Evans there, who's a pretty decent Premier League operator, I suppose. But I mean, Dante comes with a wealth of experience, decent on the ball, strong player as well. Obviously, won the Champions League last year, won just about everything last year, really. It would be. I mean, he's no spring chicken himself, so it's not a long term solution. But I imagine that's another player that would. He comes with a certain amount of accolades and a certain amount of medals and trophies under his belt, which will speak for itself. And maybe show at least that United can still attract these players and give everyone at the club, like I said before, give everyone at the club a lift.
It almost seems like, and maybe you throw Mata under this heading, but you certainly would Dante. Manchester United reminding themselves of who they are if they actually go out and spend some of this money in general. They need to. I mean, clearly based on where they sit in the standings, but also an issue of perhaps adding some of that luster back to the sorry for this word, brand. In a year where it's suffered. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think from what I've read, the Glazers have a contingency plan for if United weren't to get in the Champions League. But I mean, other factors. I mean, in terms of finances, but in other factors, it means that it's harder to attract these players. United are still a huge club. They're still, in the top two biggest clubs in the country, and that will be the case for at least a while yet. And while Moyes gets comfortable, gets his feet under the desk, and they start sort of hopefully returning to some sort of business as usual type situation, and then. These sorts of players coming in can't hurt matters, can they? They need to sign players desperately. They desperately need to improve in central midfield. They desperately need to add more depth, and they need to move some players who aren't really performing at a high level or the high enough level out of the club. Because for all the criticism that Moyes is getting, obviously not from the Man United fans who've admirably supported him so far, but for all the stick that Moyes is getting, how many of those players at Manchester United are sticking their neck out? How many of them are demanding to be picked every week because their performances have been so good? There's not many. 2 or 3 players maybe, and no one else has really stood out with massive performances, have they? So they really need to not only lift the morale of the team in the squad by signing players, but actually giving a couple of those players a kick up the backside as well and saying, look, if you're not going to perform, if you're not going to play to the best of your ability, then we'll get some players in who will. And whether that's Mata, who improves some of the other sort of fringe attacking players, or whether that's Dante who comes in and gives, 1 or 2 defensive players a kick up the arse because they'll be out of the team if they don't perform, then that can only be a good thing. It's Wednesday, which means the weekend is basically a distant memory at this point, and we do have Manchester United playing the the second leg of their League Cup semifinal with Sunderland today. But that Chelsea victory over Manchester United, what were the takeaways from that match for you? It was fairly comprehensive. I mean, it was a bit of a, I don't know. It seemed, in terms of the scoreline, it's obviously comprehensive, but that was a Mourinho match to a T, was it not?
Yeah, it was. I think that United suffering a bit of confidence at the moment. I mean, the defensive errors they made would, to me, suggest that there's a team that needs a bit of confidence. And they didn't actually play too badly. Mm-hmm. Certainly the first sort of 20, 30 minutes, they knocked the ball around quite nicely and looked quite good in possession. But the defensive errors they made enabled Samuel Eto'o, who obviously isn't the player he was, but is still a very good operator. He had a field day, essentially. I mean, but these goals, or at least two of the goals he scored, came from defensive errors, and obviously a good striker will punish you for that. But I mean, they could be eradicated if they maybe were a bit more organised, had a bit more confidence. The only way they're going to get confidence is by winning games, and that starting tonight would be good for them to have a final to look forward to, and maybe a League Cup trophy would mean a lot more to David Moyes than it did to Alex Ferguson. And they've got to take away that it's important for them tonight to get the right result and get through to the final, because they're going to be playing against Manchester City in the final. And if they can beat them in a one-off game, and we've seen Man City underperform in finals before, so there's no reason that can't happen. And that gives them a massive boost for going into the latter part of the season, because the League Cup final in England is quite early. Mm-hmm. It could be a huge boost. But in terms of the Chelsea game, Chelsea are just a better team than United at the moment. Mourinho hasn't lost a league game at home as Chelsea manager ever, I don't think. So, they weren't really expected to win it. I thought they performed okay in patches, but as you said, it ended up being a relatively comprehensive defeat for them, unfortunately.
Just looking around while I have you for a couple more minutes, looking around the results from the weekend, the Liverpool Aston Villa match stands out, and not necessarily because of the diving controversy, because I had it out about the diving controversy yesterday. I'm bored with it, and I'm not sure we're ever going to find a resolution that's going to satisfy all parties, Luke. To me, part of that is because it was Luis Suarez. Part of it is because it's a foul and a dive, and that is always complicating the situation. But in terms of the result for Liverpool, is it, it's a drop 2 points, and mm-hmm. the table is tight enough. If their goal is top four, and that's the bottom goal, I mean, the base level goal for them, they put themselves in a little bit of a difficult position, dropping points to Aston Villa when they have, and not that Villa's a terrible team this season, but they're obviously not as good as Liverpool, when they have Tottenham and Everton breathing down their neck, and you can't count out Manchester United yet. No,
of course not. Yeah, in terms of the game itself, a few points on that. For maybe the viewers that didn't see it, essentially Liverpool underestimated Aston Villa. Aston Villa have got a pretty good away record. I think they've got twice as many points away from home this season as they have at home, and the reason for that is the way they play. They play quite a sort of compact, decent-paced, counter-attacking type of style. Liverpool underestimated them hugely, in my view. I mean, Rodgers has got a bit of a dilemma, because he's got this massive talisman and an all-round sort of Premier League and Liverpool icon for all the ages in the shape of his captain, Steven Gerrard, who isn't the player he used to be. Now, Rodgers hasn't had his feet under the table long enough at Liverpool to be able to make a decision of that size, i.e. to leave Gerrard out as his best starting lineup. So politically, it's very difficult for him to do that.
Luke, are you there? All right, seem to have lost Luke Moore. Just a drop off of the phone line. Oh, it happens. It happens. It's obviously an issue with the transatlantic communication. But we are still on the air, right? Just give me a thumbs up that I'm still broadcasting. Okay. Still on the air. If we can get Luke back, perhaps we will. He obviously had a solid point to make about Steven Gerrard and the situation there at Liverpool. Exactly right. Brendan Rodgers does not have the capital yet to do something like leave Steven Gerrard out of the lineup, even though Steven Gerrard is obviously on the downhill side of his career and is not necessarily the player he used to be. All right, what I have here, what I had lined up to talk about after Luke Moore, and again, thank you to Luke Moore, Football Ramble. You all know it. You all love it. Go listen to it anyway. And follow Luke on Twitter. I think it's like Luke Aaron Moore on Twitter. I think that's right. Or Lukey Moore. I can't remember. Which one is it? Anyway, I wanted to thank Lukey Moore. It is Lukey Moore. I wanted to thank listener Ruben Pagan, a Seattle Sounders fan who has long been after me for not having a Seattle Sounders scarf on the wall. I told him, you send me a scarf, it goes up on the wall. And this is true. I'll make a pronouncement here. By the way, here's the Sounders scarf for anybody. You can't really see it because I put it directly behind my head today. But maybe I'll move in a little while. You can get a look at it. It's a CenturyLink field scarf. It's one of the ones where you drape it and the two halves come together and make the Seattle Sounders logo. So thank you to Ruben very, very much. And that's the policy. If you send me a scarf for the wall, it goes up on the wall. And I'll try to give it a place of prominence. I'll try to make it so you could see it, at least for a little while. At this point, the wall is full enough that I may have to institute a rotation policy. Right now, there is just enough scarves that no one has to get rotated out. Now, you might not be able to see them all. No, actually, you can. From the far end, which is here, which is a USA scarf, if you can see that, to this end, the Free Beer Movement scarf, our friend Dan Wiersma, you can see them all. So there you go. There's the policy. You send me a scarf, I put it on the wall. Maybe we'll have to come up with some kind of ceremony for it. A scarf hanging ceremony. No, nobody wants that. Let me go ahead and open up the phone lines here. 347-756-6276. You have thoughts on anything that I discussed with Luke? You have any thoughts on what we discussed at the top of the show, which is the potential ramifications of Camilo leaving the Vancouver Whitecaps, forcing his way out of the Vancouver Whitecaps, basically. He did. And he did so. And again, while MLS can save some face based on the fee that they got from Querétaro. And again, I suppose part of that is I'm not done with Querétaro because I'm a little confused as to why a club who believe themselves to be getting a player on a free transfer would suddenly step up and decide that they're going to pay multiple millions of dollars for that player. Camilo's good. Don't get me wrong. He may be worth that on the open market. It may be a fair price that the Whitecaps either got a fair price or a price that makes them happy enough to let him go. Because again, the leverage was on Camilo's side. He had poisoned everything in Vancouver. It was going to be very difficult to bring him back. He essentially lied to Carl Robinson or ignored Carl Robinson when told, hey, you have a contract. You're supposed to be here. He said, all right, well, screw that. I'm done. I'm going to Retro. I'm going to get a lot more money to play in Mexico. So now what happens? Again, if you missed the top of the show, to recap, Eric Gomez, our Mexican football expert, he says that he's been told that Cruz Azul is now going to take a chance on a South American player currently in MLS. And the reason that they're doing it is because of the Camilo situation. Because Camilo has set a precedent that now they're going to follow. They're going to attempt. Cruz Azul not done rating MLS talent yet, I'm told. This is Eric Gomez. Eric Gomez Fox on Twitter. Go follow him. Well-known South American star on their radar. Told that this is direct fallout from Camilo, and that team will try to sign player as if he's a free agent by January 31st. Now, again, this is that issue for me is more interesting, and what MLS does in response to me is the more interesting story. But of course, this is going to set off aimless speculation. How many well-known South American stars are in MLS? Federico Higuaín, maybe. Diego Valeri, maybe. Who else? Who else is on that list? Conrad Buck on Twitter. If Cruz Azul poaches Valeri, I'm cutting somebody. That would be bad for Portland, wouldn't it? That would be bad. He was the key to so much of what the Timbers did in 2013. They lose Diego Valeri, and Diego Valeri has said, here's something that mirrors Camilo. And I'm not saying Valeri's the guy. I have no sources on this, and it is aimless speculation at this point. But the thing that's interesting is that when you compare what Camilo said while in Vancouver, how much he loved the city, how much he liked having his family there, how in love he was with the idea of sticking around, becoming a Canadian international, all of those things. It was an indication that he enjoyed his time in Vancouver. And then he bolted. Diego Valeri seems to be a different sort of person. I don't know the guy. These are very simple, facile observations on my part. He has said he loves Portland. He enjoys playing there. That it's a different lifestyle than Argentina, and that's one of the reasons he decided to make the move. And here he is, in MLS. Does that mean he won't jump ship and try to pull a Camilo and go to Mexico? No, not necessarily. Doesn't necessarily mean that. I'm sure Timbers fans would say, I'm just saying, you don't know. All right. Let's see. Kenzie No Meta Gang. Our boy Adam Jardy confirmed Higuain hasn't been talked to at all by Cruz Azul for the record. Definitely in firm contract. Okay. That the player in question has to be in a contract. I mean, that's a option year. Not in, most of these contracts are 2+2. Going in and out on the live feed. The live feed may be having some issues this morning. I'm going to check with producer Trevor. I think actually let's do this. Let's go ahead and take a break. If we are having some issues, let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll reset. Back on Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. I'm going to guess it's the cold. It's just too damn cold for the internet right now. Hopefully that's not true, and we stay on the air and everything works out. And there's always the podcast. No matter what happens, there's a podcast. Typically, I mean, unless things just completely shut down on me, in which case there would not be a show. But there's a show right now, and we've got Brian Dunseth coming up in 23 minutes or so at the top of the hour, 11 o'clock. Looking at the other news today. And we'll leave the Camilo situation out there, the potential ramifications, and whoever this target is. And I'm all, Twitter last night was a little frustrating to see all these names just being tossed out willy-nilly. Now, in that venue, I wasn't really a fan. In this venue, hey, you want to aimlessly speculate? Go ahead, throw some names at me. I'll read them on the air. I'll give you a mention, because who knows who it is. And the phone lines are open. 347-756-6276 if you want to give me a call. All right. One of the major stories right now, and this continues to be a major story in England, is the Nicolas Anelka Canel situation, controversy. Yesterday, it was pointed out to me that perhaps I gave the indication that I had some sympathy for Dieudonné and his anti-Semitism. I did not mean to imply that at all. If I did, that's wrong. I'm wrong if I did that. Certainly not in any way justifying anti-Semitism. My only point yesterday was that in light of the fact that this isn't just Nicolas Anelka, it is several other players who are not necessarily thought of as bad people, that it would be interesting to try to at least understand a bit why the connection is there. Why does Tony Parker have a connection to Dieudonné? Because again, on the face of it, Tony Parker, anti-Semite, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe he is. That was my only point. Let's try to understand, not justify anything. I'm not justifying Nicolas Anelka either. And he's facing a 5-game ban over the Canal, currently being reviewed by the FA. He has responded via Facebook, but not officially responded, just via Facebook. All right, here's the English translation of his French statement on his Facebook page. The English Football Federation hired an expert to decide the meaning of my dumpling. Okay, that's the canal. That's what canal means, literally speaking. The latter concluded that my gesture had an anti-Semitic connotation, which led to my indictment by the FA. It would have been legitimate that this expert is French, living in France, and could have an exact knowledge of my gesture. What better expert than Mr. Kukerman, who is the president of the Jewish institution. He's the president of a Jewish organization in France, who says, and there's video of this, that Anelka shouldn't be punished for the canal, that his gesture was more about rebellion than it was anti-Semitism. And again, so we have Anelka leaning on a Jewish French leader to justify his actions, or to get away, to get beyond the anti-Semitic elements of his actions. And again, I don't think that excuses a damn thing. He knew what he was doing when he did it. He certainly knows that Dieudonné is anti-Semitic. He certainly knows there's controversy surrounding Dieudonné. He knows exactly what the possible ramifications are, even if he makes this stupid assumption, I'm in England, no one's going to care here. It's a small world. These things trickle out. Cultural exchange. These things happen. And even if, here's my last point on this, even if this was not an anti-Semitic gesture in terms of his motivation for doing it, even if we buy the idea that this French Jewish leader is saying Nicolas Anelka shouldn't be punished and it wasn't anti-Semitic, it was about rebellion, even if we swallow that whole, and I don't think anybody will, is he not due a ban because it's an overt political act? I mean, it's still an overt political act. It still indicates he's still connecting himself with this individual, whether he's doing it out of anti-Semitic reasons or not. That's the point. If you give a Nazi salute and say, well, that was just I was just showing support for my friend who happens to be a Nazi. I mean, come on. This is not an excuse. And Nicolas Anelka is going to have to sit down for a while. And hopefully we can get past this. And hopefully he understands the import of his gestures. Because that's what you get out of this Facebook statement. He doesn't understand what he did. He doesn't understand why it's wrong. And the rest of those individuals And again, not justifying anything that Tony Parker did or Samir Nasri did or anybody else. They all need to understand as well. But as I said yesterday, I'm not an expert on French culture. I do not have my finger on the pulse of the Didinet controversy. For us to go any farther than that would probably be irresponsible, and we should absolutely acknowledge, and unless you are, if you're an expert, fine, absolutely acknowledge that we don't have enough understanding to go any farther than that. And admit that there may be some gray area that we have yet to explore. There's no gray area on anti-Semitism. That I will say. All right. In World Cup 2014 news, you guys are all excited. It's coming this summer. It's happening. It's going to happen in Brazil. We know that. We're well past the point of no return. Remember, not too long ago, Brazil won't be ready. Maybe it'll come to the United States. That's not happening. And I think we even addressed on this show, as an American soccer fan, could you feel good about the World Cup ending up in the United States? Because that would clearly indicate that something went horribly wrong in Brazil in terms of construction or preparation. And the United States and American soccer fans who aren't traveling to Brazil would be benefiting from their misfortune. That's not going to happen. There will be a Brazil World Cup. It may not happen in Curitiba. Curitiba may lose its chance to host several games of the 2014 Soccer World Cup because of delays in the renovation of its stadium. A top official, this was Jerome Valk, the Secretary General of FIFA. The stadium is very delayed and well outside the delivery schedule to ensure best use by FIFA and the World Cup. He set a February 18th deadline for confirmation of Curitiba as a host city. It's really, really, really late in the process to be doing this. So again, this has clearly been a bad situation. This clearly has been a ordeal to get Brazil ready for the World Cup in 2014. It has clearly not gone well. And we don't know what's going to happen when the world arrives in Brazil in June. And the people of Brazil, the same people who utilized the stage that the Confederations Cup provided to make a point about their government and the relationship with their government and the disparity between the rich and the poor and the lack of health care and transportation and everything else. We don't know what they're going to do. It might not be great. It might not be great. And depending on how this goes, maybe it dictates whether or not Sepp Blatter runs for FIFA president again. Because the thing I have yet to mention this week is that there is an individual, former FIFA official named Jerome Champagne, who plans a run. But only if Sepp's not running. Because if Sepp runs, you know who's going to win. Everybody's got their hands in Sepp's pocket. He's got the vote. He has the votes. I mean, this is me lamenting the situation. I'd love to move on from Sepp Blatter. And if the World Cup goes badly in Brazil, who gets the blame? Now I'm sure Sepp will blame shift. He's already done some of that last year during the Confederations Cup and in a bit leading up to this. He's already blame shifted. So we'll see exactly what it would mean for his legacy. But it wouldn't be great. And again, not necessarily Sepp's World Cup. That's his saving grace, right? And in 2022, when we go to Qatar, and who knows where Sepp Blatter is at that point. When we go to Qatar in 2022, provided that happens, because you're all holding out hope that it gets moved, don't lie. Will that be on Sepp? Will that be part of his legacy? He can say, hey, that's not my World Cup. I didn't vote for that. What are you talking about? 120 degrees during the day? Well, whatever that is in Celsius. What is that in Celsius? We should be on the metric system, right? And we should be on Celsius scale. Because that's what the rest of the world does. But we're Americans, man. We gotta go with what we got. All right. So, again, fascinating to watch the build up to Brazil. And this is a little bit out of nowhere. I mean, we knew that there were stadium delays. And I don't have a current picture of where those stadiums are. We need to check that out. We need to look for that. But if Curitiba fails to be ready and they drop a host city, I'm not sure that's unprecedented. It may have happened before, but it's certainly not in recent memory something that any of us have dealt with. The soccer community has dealt with. It would require moving things around, obviously. Extra games in certain cities. Maybe Manaus would benefit and get more games, and then everybody can complain about Manaus. Speaking of stadiums, Toronto FC, owned by Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, who happen to own the Toronto Maple Leafs, Toronto FC, Toronto Argonauts of the CFL, are considering a massive expansion of BMO Field. There may or may not be taxpayer money involved up front that would eventually be paid back. Part of this is down to the 2015 Pan Am Games, which are in Toronto next year. BMO Field is owned by the city, not by the team, but it is obviously home to Toronto FC. Tim Lywicki says that the renovations to the stadium, the expansion of BMO Field, could cost almost twice as much as the original cost of the stadium. It was built. It was $63 million it cost to build BMO Field. Now this is Canadian dollars, I'm sure. I mean the conversion. Do it in your head, or go find a conversion rate that you can use. It's built with $45 million of public funds. So the idea is expand it for the Pan Am Games. Now, if they expand capacity, it also would make sense as a home for the Toronto Argonauts, who currently play in, is it the Rogers Center still? Currently play in the old Sky Dome, if I'm remembering correctly. And I guess the question is, all right, well, I've been corrected on the fact that MLSE does not own the Argonauts. Okay, I apologize for that. But clearly, an expanded BMO Field would be a suitable home for a CFL team. The question I think a lot of people are asking, and our friend Vincent Toronto put this to me on Twitter. You know, he wanted me to talk about this topic. And I guess the question for me would be, in a league that has been working to confirm its soccer credentials, if we lose a soccer-specific stadium, if it becomes a CFL stadium on top of being Toronto FC's home, how much of a dent is that in the reputation of MLS? And if I'm not mistaken, their seasons would overlap. So you're going to get lines. You're going to get a beat up field. That would be the major concern if I was Toronto FC. What's the field condition going to be? And I wonder, Toronto is a specifically now when they're sort of back in the relevant the list of relevant teams. They feel like a team that could sell more than 22,000 tickets if they wanted to. They definitely did in 07 and 08 and 09. Now that they're here and trying to get back, or trying to get somewhere, get to the playoffs for the first time, trying to turn themselves into one of the bigger teams in MLS, could they sell 30,000 tickets? Maybe, probably. Certainly sell more than 22. If there is interest, I mean, it's a good soccer market. That's clear. If the team does enough to capture the interest of the soccer fans in the city, they'll get 30,000. They should. Would you take 30,000 in Toronto, which increases the league's attendance numbers? 8,000 more people a weekend, a home weekend for Toronto, which is 16 games or whatever, 17 games. Would obviously bump the league's attendance and show Toronto back on top of one of those best markets in MLS. They'd be right behind the Sounders, right? Well, figuratively speaking, they'd be behind the Sounders, ahead of everybody else. Ahead of everybody else in terms of average attendance, if they managed to get 30. Now, I'm taking some guesses there, but if they did that, are we willing to trade a higher attendance number in Toronto for football lines and muddy tracks? Maybe. And again, I don't know the public funding of stadium situation in Canada. It may be very, very different than what happens here in the U.S. because we obviously have that debate every time it comes up. I mean, it's still going on in New York whether or not the city should be giving tax breaks to NYCFC or tax credits or whatever to help them build a stadium, whether it's in the Bronx or anywhere else. And apparently MLSE has said if we take this money from the taxpayers, we'll pay it back with interest. It's an investment. It will pay back. It will be a good return for the city. So but every time we talk about taking public money to build a venue for a soccer team, and obviously other sports have done this many, many, many times over. But every time we talk about doing it for soccer, my first instinct is, one, beggars can't be choosers. If the conditions for building a stadium for your soccer club in your town are, the local college gets to play 8 games there a year, or high schools come in every now and then, or you have to share it with the monster truck rally once a year, fine, do it. Sign me up. Especially if my current situation is an ill-fitting college football stadium, NFL venue, whatever. If that's the condition, then you do it. You don't even hesitate. So as fans, should we give these clubs a little bit more leeway? I'm tired of the NFL. Look, I know NFL lines make the game ugly in a lot of places, and I know the playoffs in Seattle were particularly egregious, partly because of the turf. But in many of these cases, the soccer team is benefiting. And I'll continue to say this. The more stadiums there are, the better for MLS. And because stadiums mean roots. Stadiums are what connects a team to a town in concrete terms. I don't mean that literally. I mean, if you have a soccer-specific stadium built with the Houston Dynamo in mind, built with the San Jose Earthquakes in mind, built with name a team that has one of these, they are tied to that location, to that locality, to that community, because they have a building that was. It's an indication that the community wants them there, especially if there's any public money involved. And for the team, it provides that base of. There's no question, where are we going to be playing next year, or are we going to lose money on our venue next year, or are we going to be stuck in an ugly building that doesn't attract more fans? It's there. It's yours. You do what you want with it within the agreement. Obviously, DC United would kill for their own building in Washington. They're trying very, very hard to make that happen. They've got the backing of the mayor. We'll see if it ever gets done. I'm not sure where that is, by the way. Who's our DC United stadium expert? Get that person on the line. So even if, and this is a discussion I had on Twitter, and I'm not going to call the person out because I tend to agree on in one way, but while I also understand the bigger picture. The San Jose Earthquakes, we've got Dave Cavall from the Earthquakes lined up to talk tomorrow, so we'll ask him directly. They're building a stadium in San Jose. The capacity of that stadium is going to be 18,000 people. My first instinct, your first instinct, everybody's instinct is what? That's tiny. 18? You can't make it 22, 20, 21? Get to 20 at least. And there's something to that. Are the Quakes underselling? Are they trying to make sure that there's a demand for their tickets? You don't want to build a 35,000 seat stadium if you can't sell it out. Selling it out is almost as important as having available seats. But at the same time, and again, I don't know exactly what went into that decision. It could have been about the market. It could have been about the money it's going to take to build the place. Clearly, there's one. It costs money to build a stadium. Even if San Jose stepped up and said, "Here's some public funding," it's a significant amount of money to build the stadium. And if you can save $5 million by keeping it at 18,000 rather than going to 20, especially if you're not convinced, and you can build an expansion. Let's assume they're building an expansion. I'm not positive about that. Then maybe you do that. Maybe that makes sense for their business model. Okay, so I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt there. The other thing is San Jose's getting a stadium. Shouldn't we just be happy about that? Considering what happened last time, considering how long it's taken the new San Jose Earthquakes to get to this point, shouldn't we just be excited that the San Jose Earthquakes are going to have their own building? Now, delays and everything else, not opening until 2015, fine, whatever. Willing to wait. 10 years ago, think about 10 years ago where MLS was, where teams were playing their games. And the picture that we have now is entirely different. Entirely different. And this isn't to say that we shouldn't be pushing for progress at all points. Absolutely. But it's also a recognition that none of this was a foregone conclusion. When MLS launched in 1996, I don't think anybody that was involved then would feel confident saying, by the time we get to 2014, 2015, if you want to add the San Jose Earthquake Stadium, we're going to have everybody in a soccer-specific venue outside of DC and New England. Or two. If you said, okay, how many teams have soccer-specific venues by 2015 to somebody there in 1996? Say maybe five. Maybe five. And they didn't. There wasn't even the idea that there were going to be 20 teams by that point. 2000, when 2001 came around, and the decision to kill off the two Florida franchises happened. Do you think anybody foresaw what we have right now? Not just in teams, not in revenue, not in attend, just in the infrastructure that it's in place. And again, I want MLS to grow and get better, and I'm not going to be satisfied with what we've got, but I'm going to recognize how lucky we are at this point. Juan on Twitter don't the Whitecaps share BC place with the CFL team? They do. They've got that weird close it down to 20,000, raise it back up to 50. The sheets, and that's indoor. They're not tearing up that field because it's turf. I mean, it's a different argument. And John Swenson, on Twitter. On Twitter. There are quite a few rugby soccer stadiums worldwide, and it seems to work just fine. There's a lot of examples of this. All right, let's take a break. We will talk to Brian Dunseth about all of this. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. As I said, Dunny, on the other side of this break. Don't go anywhere. Be right back. Back on Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. I'm joined now on the telephone by the man I'm calling American Soccer's Master of Ceremonies, Brian Dunseth. Hi, Brian.
Hey, I appreciate that. I can't even begin to tell you how nerve-wracking that was, by the way.
The draft thing? Really?
Yeah, man. I was just thinking about 5 minutes before I went on, how surreal it was. Like 8 years ago, my career's over, have no idea what I'm going to do. And then 5 minutes before the draft kicks off, I'm out there looking around, and it's just this massive ballroom, a ton of people, like kind of everyone that's in the soccer world in one place at one time.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this microphone in my hand saying, what did they do? Why would they give this to me? So it's a pretty fun moment.
Well, I mean, yeah, for those of you who don't know, Brian was he was doing post-pick interviews with all of the guys that were drafted at the SuperDraft in Philly on Thursday. And in that room, which was, I mean, the music was what it was, but it was also very loud. That event is kind of a surreal event, Brian. But you've done those kind of things in front of stadiums with 30,000 people in them. What made that different?
To be honest, I just think it was kind of this come together of these power players in the world of soccer.
Because you could pick out individual faces and look see that guy sitting right there rather than this just mass of people.
Yeah, it was that fun moment where, like you said, I've been on camera in a live shot, in a Gold Cup final. And you just think in that split moment, you're looking to this lens and you're like, okay, cool. There's a ton of people watching right now. Please don't mess up. And then you're in the live stadium and you've got that echo and that Al Bundy moment where you say a word and you can hear it a second later. But to be in that moment, it was just, I don't know, it was just pretty surreal moment, and just not focusing on anyone, just kind of doing the sprinkler, just looking back and forth across the room without focusing in on one person and just acting like, no one else exists. It was fun. It was frightening, but it was fun.
I like the way this conversation is going. I had no intention of talking about your job specifically, but now that you've opened it up, when you said 8 years, when you retired, first of all, had you been a public speaker type? I mean, like I do this show, I can sit here in front of a microphone and talk all day, but if you put me in front of a room full of people and I'm supposed to, I might lock up completely.
Yeah, it's funny. Fortunately, I'm about to embark on my third year of media training with Major League Soccer. So Ben Quartermanch, Gabe Gabor, and this year Amanda Vandervoort and I are going to go to Florida and go to Arizona, and we meet with each individual team and kind of go over all the media stuff for the year and kind of try to steer these guys in the right direction in terms of just don't get caught putting stupid stuff on Twitter and Instagram, and from a former player's perspective, kind of how to get comfortable in front of the camera. And for me, it was Alexi. I was 20 years old. It was 1997. We were at the old Foxborough Stadium, and I had been in the national team for a couple camps already, so I knew Alexi and Joe Max and Mike Burns and all these guys, and so they kind of gave me a free pass. And I was with Alexi, and I was like, hey, where are you going? And he said, I'm going to go do this interview. And so I walked down, and I watched him do this interview. And, for those who don't know Alexi personally, he's pretty quiet, off camera. He's pretty mellow. But the moment the light turns on, it's like this whole different person comes out.
Yeah.
And I just watched him do this interview, and I said, okay, I want to learn how to do that. Yeah. And so I reached out to one of the local sports guys. It was my second week in Boston. I just said, I just want to be comfortable on camera. I want to learn how to do this, because I was doing all these kind of speaking soccer in the Olympic team in 2000. And so I kind of learned how to get rid of ands, and how to kind of step into front of crowds and deliver a message. So kind of trying to teach these kids, kids nowadays, how to do that, and kind of allow them to showcase their personalities and showcase their opinions, while at the same time just being aware that the moment that they tweet something, it's an instant press conference.
It's interesting. I mean, obviously it's a good thing for these teams to go through and for these guys to learn about, but you're responsible for, in some ways, making the league a little bit more boring than it might otherwise be. Is that what you're telling me?
No, not boring. Okay. Just allowing these guys to be a little bit more aware of their surroundings at times.
Well, I mean, look, obviously from a team's perspective, you definitely want your players going through these seminars and learning about these things. We hear about the NFL doing this kind of stuff with rookies all the time. it clearly makes sense from a corporate standpoint and a business standpoint. But again, my job is to come on here every day for 90 minutes and talk about what's happening. If some MLS player goes off on Twitter, thank you, Juan Agudelo, I have something to talk about. So I want
no,
that.
listen, I love it too. I love it too. I mean, he got me going because I would love to take some of these kids that pop off on Twitter and put them in a time capsule and take them back to 1990 or 1997 and let them see what it's like getting dressed at Brandeis University and having to get into a van and driving to a soccer field and, sharing facilities with football teams and, not having your own place to practice and play. And,
right.
I mean, earning $24,000 and having to pay $1,000 a month for rent and share a one-bedroom apartment. I mean, it's pretty surreal how far we've come. But at the same time, I think some of these guys today who have been making hundreds of thousands of dollars, while it's not millions, still need to understand that, listen, dude, you're playing sports for a living. All these guys are, a majority of these people in the stands wish they could switch places with you in a heartbeat. That's the last thing I want to do is hear you complain about something. So I want people to showcase their personality. I want the Kai Kamaras of the world to earn free Chipotle burritos just because they tweet, about Chipotle burritos, their love. Charlie Davies and Stu Holden were the two guys that really put themselves on a platform using social media in the beginning, and now you see the trickle-down effect and what it's created. So I love these personalities. I just want these guys to just be a little bit more aware of what they're saying can be held accountable. And when you're publicly complaining about your team or your lack of practice facilities,
right,
that could come back to haunt you in an MLS draft.
Oh, I wonder what you're talking about there with that last little one. Let's go back to the draft, and rather than focus on the job you were doing there, the draft itself. I mean, we have this debate over what the relevance of the draft is now, what it will be in the future. We see a lot of kids going through the homegrown signing process rather than going through the super draft. Is it still super? Should we be bothering to call it that? What's the value there at this point?
I think it's in transition. I could see the whole combine going away in the future and in the near future. I personally am not a big believer in the combine. I think it actually brings down the value of players and what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just too short of a turnaround in between games. Players are completely unfamiliar with each other in a short amount of time, and they're forced to play out of position because you're not, these college coaches coming in and they're trying to slap teams and having them showcase their abilities and talents. I think for the standout individual player, it works, but I just don't think it does a lot of good, especially because, like you said, it's essentially a watered-down pool of players, and the onus now is the homegrown. So I'm not sure how long it hangs around. I do love the idea of developing players, and I think that last year with Giassi Zardes kind of opening up the door of that whole bypassing the draft, and when he could have been probably the number one pick and signing with the LA Galaxy as a homegrown. I mean, it's the future, and I just think it's only a matter of time before it becomes reality, and I think it puts more pressure on teams if they're going to do their scouting and do their preparation, their development. I think it's more immediate than long term.
MLS has never shown hesitance to change things up when they feel like something needs to be changed. Sometimes they do it and don't even tell us. The super draft is one of those things they've held on to for a very long time. And, well, I mean, originally the college draft and then changing it to the super draft. And it feels to me, and being in that room, Donnie, it feels like we treat it like it's 2002, but it's not anymore. And is the value more about getting everybody together than it is about what? And no offense to I don't mean to downgrade the talent of any of these kids who were drafted. I'm just saying that as a feeder system to MLS teams and what they actually rely on talent wise, it's not what it used to be.
Well, I think what the combine really does behind the scenes is it allows all of these coaches, staff members, general managers, presidents, everyone to get the same place at the same time and just start knocking out deals, knocking out movement. I saw firsthand, and which is kind of wild when you peel back the curtain of the draft itself, watching how DC was going to select the player, then Vancouver jumps in, and then Philly jumps in, and watching that all happen so quickly, there's definitely a value in the draft and in the movement and kind of how that all plays out. But yeah, the places like the Combine and the convention, the NSCAA convention, it allows everyone to come together and start making those moves, especially in a year like this where there's such an incredible amount of turnover from a head coaching position. I mean, Colorado doesn't even have a head coach.
Right.
Dallas, up until a few days before the draft, it hadn't named Oscar Pereira, and yet all these changes, all these trades, all these signings, this movement was going on without anyone in charge, quote unquote. So, it's an interesting time in the evolution of MLS, and we're still in a young league. We're still evolving. We're still making changes. I don't necessarily have as much of a problem as other people do with how much change is going on with MLS, because I think, to be honest, they're trying to get it right. They're trying to do it the right way. They're not trying to piss off the supporters or the media. I think it's just there's a major learning curve that we're all dealing with. And now we're starting to talk about big bucks, and that CBA is right around the corner.
Yeah, it's a perfect segue into a couple of interesting things that have happened that I definitely want to get your thoughts on. MLS, for all of the growth and trying to get things right, doesn't operate in a vacuum, even in this country. And the Andre Lewis situation is the most interesting thing for me coming out of the draft. Now, he's not a college kid. He comes out of Jamaica. He's a youth international for them. Clearly, he had some attention before he ever showed up in Fort Lauderdale. In the aftermath of him being drafted, it comes out he was already signed to the Cosmos. I don't know what this means. I do find it interesting the Cosmos chose that timing to sign him. Does that indicate anything? Are we going to eventually see some sort of battle? And the Cosmos is the only team really that can compete with MLS toe to toe when it comes to salary and sort of cachet because of that name brand.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think MLS will see more of a battle as these NASL, USL clubs that have this massive financial backing can come in and start swinging their weight around. It was it surprising? Yeah, absolutely. My eyebrows raised up right away when I read afterwards about this. But I also think that you have to look at the individual player first and foremost, and kind of where he's coming from, what his family life's like, that whole background of these individual kids. Going into something that's the great unknown, unless you've already signed the contract with MLS, or you sign Generation Adidas. I think these kids are scared to death, not knowing, what else is there. I mean, these kids have given their whole 17, 18, 19 to 23 years of their life to one thing, and that's playing soccer and living this dream. So when someone comes in and offers you, let's say, $75,000 and you're 20 years old, you're going to think about that. You're going to, it's going to be hard to turn down. I mean, I left Cal State Fullerton in '97 for $24,000.
Right.
So, but I wasn't on scholarship there. So, it was the right move for me. I wanted to play professional soccer. The idea to get paid to play soccer was what it was. So, the hard thing for MLS is identifying, creating this network of scouting, identifying these players, offering them the contracts, and then getting it right.
Yeah.
There's one kid that sat at that draft through 2 rounds, and I don't think he was picked until late in the 3rd round. And everyone projected him to be either a late first or an early second round. He wasn't picked at all. So, it's the science behind it isn't perfect. And when you have people throwing money around, I think people are going to go with the safe. Some people are going to choose the safe bet as opposed to kind of hanging around and seeing where you're at, and then waiting to quote unquote make the team, makes the cut. I think it all gets a little bit squirrely when you look at it through the eyes of these individual kids.
All right. The next thing that's happened fairly recently that may be a crack in sort of MLS's armor, and we'll see what kind of ramifications it has down the line is Camilo leaving Vancouver despite having a contract option. Now, I don't know, none of us are contract lawyers here, Brian, but we understand the notion of a unilateral option. When you were playing in MLS, was there any question over stuff like that? I mean, I know we had Frazier versus MLS and challenging the single entity and everything, but was some of this actually discussed? Can the team really tell me I have to come back if I don't want to?
Well, I think how do I say this the right way? When you're in that locker room and you've got these teammates from all different parts of the world.
Right.
You've got guys that are incredibly educated, very, very smart. You've got guys that are kind of right down the middle, and then you got a couple complete nuggets. Now, I'm not saying Camilo was a complete nugget,
right.
but I would say 95% of every locker room knows exactly what's going on with their own individual contract. When you have agents, and I'm not in the know with his agent situation or whatever it may be. He had a great year. His team didn't make the playoffs. He scored a lot of goals. He probably had an agent in his ear saying, I can get you a buttload more money than what you're making currently.
Right.
We'll go to Mexico. And from all accounts, it sounded like this agent pretty much presented Camilo as a free agent. Listen, Mexico's got monopoly money. You know, they can back the truck up and just dump money into your front yard. And that's hard to turn down. You know, safety is always going to be an issue down there. But for Camilo to do what he did, it was completely unprofessional. I was surprised that Vancouver didn't get in front of that and didn't release a statement before it all happened, just to say we understand what's going on from a press scenario. But you know, I was having a conversation with a friend, and I said it can go a couple ways. One, he can come back with his tail between his legs, and you know, Carl Robinson, who probably had a friendly relationship with him as an assistant coach, they can handle it privately. Or MLS, the club in Mexico has to pony up and pay whatever, you know, that transfer fee is worth. And you know, somehow it ends up, I think it works out more in the favor of the player than it does for Vancouver, because it's pretty much a no-win situation. I don't remember a power play like this off the top of my head that worked out the way it's worked out for Camilo. But I think the good news is Vancouver at least recoups some of the money. The question now is, can they turn that money into an impact player and what they had with Camilo?
Yeah, there's some things filtering out of Mexico. Our friend Eric Gomez, we have to talk Mexican soccer on this show pretty regularly, is reporting that Cruz Azul may try to go down this same path and make and pick out a South American star at MLS to make a power play. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know if if MLS is going to have to deal with this on a regular basis. But if it does happen again, I don't know. I mean, in this case, they got a transfer fee for Camilo. I guess that's the saving grace. But if you can't have your players ignoring their contract options and being treated as free agents in Mexico, that's a bad dynamic.
Yeah, and I think on one hand, it's a feather in the cap of MLS because we're identifying young players with a lot of potential, giving them those opportunities. I think the same can be said for a kid like Freddie Montero and kind of the success he's having now.
Right.
I don't think there's anything wrong with quote unquote development league. You know, I don't think we should look down on being an export league as well.
Okay.
I think what stings is the fact that we're losing players to Mexico.
Right.
You know, we're losing. You know, we just lost Juan Mata. Yeah, he signed with Stoke, but he's on to FC Utrecht. Historically, a power player in Holland. You know, Herenveen was successful for Michael Bradley, or for AZ had success. But I mean, I think some people can make the argument that going to these these teams that aren't necessarily competing for championships, I don't know if it's a huge upgrade. Financially, it's a huge upgrade, and everyone's going to think about that money.
Yeah.
You know, I think now MLS is countering that with basically saying that, guys, we will pay American players. That's a huge movement and shift in the world of Major League Soccer. Now it's just about, are you going to overpay for these American players coming back? You know, the Dempseys and Michael Bradleys, I have no problem paying them monopoly money. I think that's great. But, you know, when Maurice Adu wants to come back and he's only played one game at Stoke, I think there could be an argument made to say, okay, that's great to have him back, but what are we paying him? You know, are we paying him premiership money, or are we paying him, you know, high-level MLS money right underneath the designated player? Because that's basically where we're at. I think we as a league have to identify the national team as kind of two groups, you know, World Cup national team players and kind of CONCACAF national team players. And I think there's a big difference between the two.
Absolutely. All right. While I have you, I got to talk about Royal Salt Lake just a little bit, transitioning from Jason Christ to Jeff Kazar, and how that's going so far. I mean, clearly they made the final last year. How much change actually needs to happen on a personnel level, and is there going to be growing pains here for Jeff as he steps in?
I think this team is put together so well. It essentially will coach itself. It'll know within the team on the field the philosophy and how they've played over the last 6-7 years, that no matter whatever happens, they know what they need to do when it comes to game time. Mm-hmm. For Jeff, the biggest obstacles from any assistant is you go from being an assistant to being the head coach. And that's just not training sessions. Jeff worked with Nick Raimondo and the goalkeepers for an hour, and then would jump into the main session and finish the session out. Well, now it's different. He's in charge, and Paul Dalglish, Craig Weibel, Daryl Shore, and Andy Williams. They're all going to have massive roles in the day-to-day training sessions and dealing with the players. For me, the big question is when you're in the game. As an assistant, you start barking out ideas of how to make impact changes, whether that's adjustments in game, whether that's substitutions coming off the bench. Well, now that pressure falls on the shoulders of Jeff, because that's where the accountability lies. I think also, the dynamic of going from an assistant to a head coach, it's the same thing that Carl Robinson's going to deal with, that Benny Olsen dealt with. That man management becomes a little bit more important. So I don't think really anything changes in the short term. In the long term, he's going to have to make those minor tweaks. The good thing is Jeff and Andy both know these players. They're very comfortable with these players. The players are very comfortable with them. And Garth Lagerwey's done a fantastic job building this roster. So, it's going to be a battle as always. LA Galaxy, Portland Timbers, Seattle Sounders, New York Red Bull, now Toronto FC coming in, obviously Sporting Kansas City. I think it's still going to be the same names. I think the same teams are going to be in that same realm of competing for the Supporters Shield and going towards MLS Cup.
And certainly the personnel in place for everything to be as good in 2014 as it was in 2013 for RSL. Hopefully, at the last hurdle to be cleared. Brian Dunseth, the original winger on Twitter, you know him from pretty much everything. As I mentioned, the master of ceremony, American soccer's master of ceremonies, Brian Dunseth. Appreciate your time, Johnny. Thanks a lot, man.
I appreciate it, man. As always. Thank you.
Talk to you soon. All right, let's wrap up this edition of Soccer Morning. Just a couple of minutes here. Always happy to talk to Donnie. Fantastic stuff, and certainly getting his insight into that transition. That's one of those things you don't really get a chance to hear about. You see Brian Dunseth on TV, and he's really good at his job. And, you see any athlete really who makes that transition and makes it successfully, you got to wonder how hard it is for them to do that. He laid the groundwork for him to be a media professional after his playing career when he was 20 years old. Who thinks to do that? I mean, when I was 20, man, if I was a professional soccer player at 20 years old, as Brian Dunseth was, even if I was making $24,000 a year and paying $1,000 a month for rent and sharing a one-bedroom apartment, I would still never think I need to better my media chops so that, and I'm not sure he was thinking about one day I'll be doing this, but he certainly wanted to improve it for a legitimate reason. I would have been like, hey, I'm a pro soccer player. Let's go out. Let's go, training, games. Let's go out. I'm a pro athlete, man. Anyway, fantastic stuff there from Donnie. I wanted to mention the last thing here of the day, the interesting loan of Tony Cassio from the Colorado Rapids, who don't have a head coach. Who's making that decision to the Houston Dynamo? Tony Cassio, a player a lot of people like in terms of his creative abilities, has not really gotten a chance to show them off in Colorado, and this intra-league loan thing is going to be fascinating. How much time does he get in Houston? Ultimately, do the Rapids benefit? Now, if you are unclear about the rules for the intra-league loan, which was only introduced last year in 2013 and was not utilized in 2013 by anybody, here you go. Players 24 years of age or younger are eligible. Loans must be executed within the primary transfer window of a given MLS season. All loans run through the end of the MLS season. Player reverts to his original club only after MLS Cup. Roster slot and budget considerations surrounding the loan are subject to negotiation. There are no limits on the number of loans involving one team, blah, blah, blah. The interesting thing here, and somebody asked me, can he play against the Rapids? I mean, you see a lot of loan deals where a player can't play against his parent club. I don't think that's going to be the case here. I can't imagine why they would throw that in there. I mean, maybe the Rapids would do that, but isn't that kind of an antiquated notion when it comes to loans within the Premier League or the Football League or Championship, whatever, any of those English leagues? Doesn't really seem to be necessary, if you ask me. What's the reason? We just don't want to get beat by our own player? Okay, that's rather strange. All right, good show today, Luke Moore. We got cut off with Luke Moore, but it was still a great chat. Great chat with Brian Dunseth. If you had problems with the live stream today, definitely go check out the podcast, iTunes, ratings and reviews, by the way. Help us out a lot. Again, thank you very much to everybody who contributed to the Indiegogo campaign. We have a couple of hours left on it. We have reached our goal and more, and we are ecstatic about the level of support that you guys have shown for us in 2014. All right. Am I missing anything? News and notes and housekeeping? No. That's it, right? Am I done? I'm done. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow, Thursday. Bye.
Check it out.